This is Greg Henthorne with The Greg Henthorne Show, where I talk to authors and creators about their creative process to help you be more creative. Today, my conversation is with Scott Stevens, best-selling, award-winning author, 5 books. We talk about his process of writing fiction and how it can apply to helping you in your process of beginning to write and of being a successful author. You'll notice towards the end there are some technical difficulties we have with the video, but everything ends up okay. I think you'll enjoy it. I did. And now, here's my conversation with Scott Stevens. All right, I'm talking today to Scott Stevens, international best-selling and award-winning author, 5 published books. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell me, how does your writing journey begin?
Oh, well, it was a long time ago. My first writing experiences that I got paid for, I used to do cover sports. I actually worked on the radio as a sportscaster, and
Whereabouts?
all over the country. Really, I kind of made my way around long time ago when I was younger and more agile. So what I started doing was I learned that I could get paid twice actually for doing a game if I broadcast it, and then when I got finished, if I wrote an article for the local newspaper, I got paid to broadcast it, and then I got paid to write about it. And I kind of accidentally stumbled on that, and then I made it kind of my MO wherever I was working, and so that was my first experience writing. And then over the years, as time and technology evolved, I was working for countless online sports magazines, editorials, game updates, football, hockey, baseball, and then I got involved with a website to do sports. They actually approached me from another website, told me they wanted to build their sports section, and would I be interested in coming? So I was more than happy. And the site was built more for celebrity gossip.
Yeah.
And the sports section really didn't take off. So he asked me if I'd be interested, and they were going to shut the sports down and stay on doing celebrity stuff, which I really had no interest in doing, but the pay was outstanding. I mean, and then I'm a positive person, so I was writing positive articles, and the editor, his name was Rob, and he told me, he said, I really hate to be this guy, but if you write negative articles, you make even more money. I'm like, what? Because at that time you got paid by the view, and so I didn't really want to do it, but I tried one. It took off. It was their number one view. I don't even remember what it was, but I made like $1,500 off an article that took me an hour to write. And I mean, it was instantly, and it just, I got paid for like 3 months off of that. It was crazy. So
I want to jump in a second. Let me ask you this. I'm curious. You started out on doing speaking or doing radio announcing, right?
Yeah.
Then you realize you're writing things, but those are 2 different talents, speaking and writing. So what gave you the ability and the confidence to actually make that leap?
It wasn't a conscious decision.
What made you think you could do it? I mean, you're a talking guy. Come on, man. What made you think you could actually start doing putting words?
When I was a kid, I've been a sports fan my whole life, and it was my dream actually to be a sportscaster. So ever since I was a kid, I've been announcing games in my head or in my yard or in my kitchen, and then in high school I started writing about games, and a game write-up. I don't know. To me, it's just it's a natural. If you can watch the game and understand the game, you can write about the game when it's over. You
don't see a difference in the way, like it's not a one thing or the other. They just flow right into each other.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So
yeah, and it just worked out. It wasn't. It just, to me, if you can talk, it's all about knowledge, like anything else. If you have the knowledge, you should be able to write. If you know football and you can talk about a football game, you should be able to sit down and write about that football game when it's over. That's just the way my brain works anyway, you know.
That, not everyone works that way. That's
Really?
a gift. That's very good. So now you decided that you're going to. So then you found this website, and the website you started doing. It sounds like you, at one point, you kind of gave up the talking about, and you went to the writing about.
It was a lot less work, and it paid the same or more.
Now, why
And
was it a lot less work?
um, because when you do a game, first of all, there's a lot more travel. When you're doing like I was on the radio, you have to go. If the game starts at 7 o'clock, you got to be there at 5 or 4. You got to set up, and then afterward, when the game ends, like if I'm doing a hockey game and it ends at 10:15, the fans go home. I got to go down to the locker room, get sound bites, listen to every interview, and talk to as many people as I can, and I'm out of there at midnight.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I have to put the sound bites together and get them ready. And don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I found that the writing, there was a lot less time that it took to do it. And like I said, the pay was equal or better in some cases. When I started working for these websites who paid by the view and some paid flat fees for the articles, it worked out where it was more. And radio got to the point where I got tired of the travel. And I was younger, and so I just stopped doing that. And that was a conscious decision to stop doing that. But the writing just never stopped. And then to finish that previous question, the editor that I was talking to, that guy Rob, who told me about the negative articles, I told him about an idea I had for my first book, which was On Ice. And he said, "Oh my God, it's a great idea. Do it." I said, "Well, that's cool. How do you write a book?" "I don't know. I write articles. I don't know how to write a book."
Did you think of yourself when you process information? Do you process information by speaking or by writing, or how do you process information?
I have to write it.
Interesting.
I try real hard. I get what happens is I tend to focus, and then what happens is I try and focus too hard, and my brain, like just the sponge part, just shuts down. So I have to write things down. If I don't write it down, 10 minutes later I won't remember it.
That's interesting. So does that apply in your personal life? You have to write things down to remember
Everything. Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to write things down, then I lose the list.
I go. Believe me, it happens.
So okay, so so he said, "Hey, you should write a book," and you said, "I don't know. How do I write a book?" What made you? So then, what was the genesis of that book writing experience, and how many years ago was this?
On Ice came out, I believe, in 2016. I believe. I worked on it for about 3 years, that first one, because it was funny. You know, he said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Turn it into a book." But I didn't know how, and he didn't know how. He was just, support. He's like, "Yeah, it's a great idea. I'd love to read it."
Yeah.
But he was an editor, for articles, and so I didn't know. He didn't know. So I started writing, and it was something where I would work on it for a couple of weeks, and because I wasn't an author, I had to write my articles. So and then I come back to it in a few more weeks, and then I take a couple of months off. And so a couple of times I took so much time in between that I had to go back and read what I had written, to remember where I was and keep it up. It was a very long process. The editing was very long. The research I did was extensive. It's a cop story with jail and courthouse scenes, so I wanted to make sure they were as authentic as possible. And it was a very, very long process.
How long did your first book take to do?
About 3 years.
And then and did each book take about that similar amount of time, or what are you at now in terms of cranking out a book?
Oh no, now 6 months. If I put my mind to it, 6 months or less. It's funny because On Ice took about 3 years, and then Twister Town was my second, and that was my international bestseller. I did that in like 3 months.
How many words per day are you writing at that point?
I don't go by words. What I try and do is I try and hit 5 chapters
a day.
When I'm working. Yeah, see what I do, I get up early. I get up like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'll work. So when I get my 8 hours in, it's still early enough in the day where I have the rest of the day.
So you
And I
write
get
for
up,
8 hours?
I try to. I try, yeah. I'll get up 4 or 5 o'clock. I'll go till 11, 12, sometimes 1 o'clock. And I don't always get that far in. Sometimes after a couple of chapters, I'm done. But I don't have a word count. I never stop writing in the middle of a chapter. I always have to have the chapter finished because I don't want to come back and lose the train of thought that I was in. So, but my goal when I do sit down to write, I try and get 5 chapters out. And I don't know how many of my books that you've read, but I try and stick with short chapters. So normally I'd say probably it works out to maybe about 10,000 words
Per chapter?
No, a day.
A day.
If I'm writing, yeah.
And then, so 10,000 words per day. And when you finish that time, does your mind move off and think about other things? Are you constantly churning when you're in the middle of a book? You're always churning, or can you put it aside and walk away from it?
It's really different every day. Sometimes it'll consume me if there's something that I don't feel is working out right. And that's the great thing about fiction is if I don't like it, I can scrap it and create a whole different world.
How often does that happen?
More often than it should.
Wait. Why do you say that? To me, that is a sign of that's a good sign that you don't just say you allow yourself to revisit and modify.
Well, here's the type of person I am. If I watch a movie and something isn't plausible, even though it's fiction, I get it's fiction, but it's still, to me, it has to be plausible. I'm not a big sci-fi fan for that reason. So if I know as quick as I get turned off, if I don't want people out there that are like me to be reading my book and say, oh, no. I get it's fiction, but that there's no possible way that could happen. And then they stop reading it because I'll finish watching the movie, but my interest level drops considerably. So when I'm playing out a scene, I'll think about it and I'm like, oh, that's not real. That could, that's a little far-fetched. And then I'll go back and I'll change some things, and sometimes I'll just scrap the whole thing and start over again.
How often do you scrap and start over?
I would say there's probably 3 or 4 scenes per book that I'll think about. Here's what, honestly, I'll get further along in the story, and I'll say, oh, this is great, but then I'll think, oh, wait a minute, that scene in chapter 10 now does not make any sense. But I like this, so I can either change this, or if I really like it, I go back and then that's where I'll scrap the scene and think, oh, it could be so much better, and different things like that. I don't write like a lot of. I've heard so many authors talk about their outlines that they do and different things that they do, and I really, I don't want to use the word freestyle, but I'm just so unorthodox in the way that I do it.
That's interesting. I want to get your writing process in a second. I definitely want, but I want to make sure we don't. I want to touch on this one more time because I have a real question about it. When you find something implausible, and I'm curious because I tend to do the same thing. The moment that I feel like something isn't plausible, my interest level completely not evaporates, but I'm just along for the ride at that point. I've committed an hour and 15 minutes to this thing, and I'll stick with the movie till it ends. But I'm curious, when this happens, is it more typically a problem of the plot or of the character or of the scene?
It could be all three. I'm the type of person that and I don't know why it is. I kind of wish it wasn't, but I notice everything wrong when I'm watching something. Mm-hmm. If something is out of order, if there's a certain scene that they've done 3 or 4 times and they go back to it and there's something different in the background or something like that, I catch it. And I wish I wasn't like that because it annoys me.
Yeah.
But if it's something that has to do with the storyline, or if it just doesn't make any sense, sometimes I'll find myself thinking, why was that scene even there? It has nothing to do with the story. Or if there's like, I like thrillers, obviously, so I write them, but there's a guy who will find himself in a precarious situation and he does something like MacGyver is a perfect example. I could never watch that show because there's nothing plausible that he did.
You're
Every
not a
time
fan
this
of duct tape.
yeah, every time this guy was in trouble, he just happened to find the right tool and for the job. And to me, that's not real. And I could never watch that show, but things like that.
So I think that's fascinating. And how do you in your own writing make sure that you keep things plausible, real? How do you what is the barometer? Because I would imagine when you're writing, you're so close into it. It's hard to want to kill your darlings, as the often quote is said.
Um, my better half will quickly point it out.
Oh, interesting.
There's during On Ice, I wasn't as seasoned and experienced a writer as I am now. But there's a scene in there where John Kincaid, the main character, gets busted out of jail, and he gets the escape happens on a bus. He's being transported from one facility to another, and I won't say what I settled on for a scene. It's way better than what I had in mind. For some reason, I don't know why it sounds so stupid now. It sounded stupid then when she pointed it out. It didn't in my head. I had the bad guys tie a zip line across the road in a snowstorm, and they killed a deer or something, and then they tied the deer to the zip line. And when the bus came, they winged it down the zip line. The bus was supposed to see the deer and swerve off the road, and they were going to break him out of. She's like, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." And I'm like, "No, I think it's a genius." She's like, "They're not going to all that trouble." And the scene now, I love it. It's awesome, and it's so much better, and it's so much real. It's that it could actually happen. No one's putting a deer on a zip line.
So I'm curious. You said something interesting. You said the scene that's there now. You love it. When you get done writing, do you love it, or do you hate it, or do you go through? Do you feel ambivalent when you get done? When you get done writing for the day, do you love your work? And when you get done, when you get done, ready to send it to the publisher, or we'll get to more of that later. But where is your emotional state each day when you finish with that 10,000 words, 5 chapters that you've written?
I really don't. I don't dislike what I do right away. As the story unfolds, it's like a movie in my head.
Yeah.
So it's playing out. But as I move forward, I'll say, okay, like I just said, now something previous doesn't really make sense, and I'll have to go in and change it. I don't really dislike when I'm in the moment. I like everything that's coming out, but then as time goes by, like everything else in life, the story evolves, and then I'm like, okay, now that's not so good anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'll have to go back and change. But at the moment I write it, I think it's good. And when I'm sure when you write a book, by the time you get ready for publishing, you've read it like 9 times, and eventually, if there's something that's not good, you're gonna be like, you know what, that just doesn't even make any sense. Why is it in there? But never when I do it. In hindsight, when I look back, I'll think, no, that scene is not very good anymore. Something like that. But that's down the road. Usually, the day that I'm writing, when I'm finished, I'm usually happy. And the happier I am, the longer I'll go.
Interesting. So you might go 15,000 words if you really are enthused or excited. You don't make yourself cut off. You don't make yourself stop.
Oh, no. If I'm on a roll, I'll go all day. If I'm on a roll, I'll just keep going, because I know there's going to be 5 or 6, 7 days in a row, 2 weeks that I won't write at all sometimes. So if I'm on a roll, I don't cut it off. I just keep going. Yeah.
Then how do you deal with writer's block? Do you believe in writer's block? And what does that look like?
I really don't. It's funny because I hear so many people talk about that, and I don't really believe in it. The days that I don't write, I don't want to write. It has nothing to do with writer's block. And there will be times, and a good friend of mine, he's a pro wrestling legend. His name is Bob Roop. He's in he has a book coming out soon. I had this discussion with him not long ago. He goes, "Yeah, I'll go 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes. I just don't feel like writing. I don't want to." He goes, "Is that bad?" I said, "No. It's either in you or it's not. You know, if it's not ready to come out, it's not ready to come out." Writer's block. I think the longest I've ever had a writer's block is like a day. You know, if I'll or when I'm coming to an end, I might take a few days and say, all right, I like the ending I have in mind, but I want something better.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll stop and I'll do. But I'm never at lacking of ideas and things like that. And I'm sure it's a real thing. I'm sure people, you know, do suffer from it and have it. But I really, I just have, my brain is constantly moving. So it's not really anything I've ever experienced. Anytime that I go a period without writing, it's just because I don't want to or I don't feel like it. You know,
Then
and you got to be in a mood.
what is it that drives you to continue to actually not make that 2 weeks that you don't want to write to 3 months to 2 years? In other words, something draws you back in and you don't just abandon it totally.
Um, just the fact that my stories I like, and I like when I transform myself into it, and you know to continue on with it. But sometimes life gets in the way.
Yeah.
You know, happen, and you take a day, and then it's 2 days, and before you know it, it's a week, and then you're like, oh God, now I don't want to sit in front of my computer for 3 or 4 hours. You know, and it's I have I have a thriller that I'm working on right now. It's called 30 Minutes, and it's a political thriller, and I absolutely love the story. Uh, but I haven't worked on it now. When Corona started, I got it in my head. I'm going to finish 30 Minutes. During all this time, I haven't touched it.
You mean COVID?
Well, yeah, when COVID started,
Yeah, yeah.
I, you know, everything was shut down. You had to stay home. I said, I'm going to finish 30 Minutes. It's halfway done. I love the story. There's nothing I don't like. And I said, I'm going to use this time. I'm going to get this done. And it's not done. I haven't even touched it. I will eventually because, you know, I love the story but there's just so many other things going on. And I thought that I would have a lot of downtime. Um, sometimes
The
I'm very, very disciplined, and sometimes I'm not.
so the time. So you started talking about your writing process. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Uh, I don't sit down and write out a complete outline.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who do. I probably should because I forget sometimes. And then I've actually been in the middle of a book and changed my path in the story, and I realized it till later, and I'm like, oh, what the hell is that? You know,
Yeah.
no, I can't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So I get the idea. When I have an idea, I think about it for probably a good month, and I have the story played out in my head for the most part, and then I sit down and I start to write. And as I start to write, what I have in my head changes, and it unfolds, I go on and through, and I have an idea of the ending, but I never really work on the ending until I get to that point, because it's hard sometimes because as you go through the process, a lot of things change. Your characters change. That's the great thing about fiction is so many things evolve as the story unfolds that your original idea may not be as good as what's coming out of that original idea. So what I do, and I learned this the hard way, is whenever I create a new character, I have a pad on my desk, and I don't do an outline, but I write down every single character, how I describe them, what their characteristics are, what their importance is to the story, so I can refer back to that. But as far as writing anything down, that's pretty much all I do is just the characters.
So, and you let it. Do you know what's going to happen before the story ends?
I do, and but it always changes. You know, as the
Interesting.
story unfolds and I get to that point, the ending I had in mind when I started writing usually isn't plausible anymore, and there's something better.
And when you say there's something better, in other words, the way it develops, it makes more sense. There's more excitement to it. And
well, Twister Town is about tornadoes.
Yep.
And I had an ending in mind when I started. I had that whole story. Half of it was real life, half of it was a dream. And I got through, and the ending, at the end, everybody died.
Yeah.
It was death, destruction, everything. But it wasn't. It was very impersonal, and I wanted the beginning to. The beginning was very personal as you get into the story. I wanted the ending to be as personal as the beginning, because I think the beginning of the story really draws you in and gets your interest. And so I changed what was going to be complete death and destruction. I let a few people live, and I ended it on a more personal level as it began. So that was kind of cool the way that worked out. But my endings, I haven't, like 30 minutes, I have an ending in mind, but I know that's not what it's going to be.
Really? So have
when
you,
I get to that point.
do you do so? So I'm going to guess your characters surprise you at times in what they do or say.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny since I invent them,
Yeah.
and I create them. Yeah, it's funny because as I'm going through and the story is unfolding, I just have these ideas for the characters that I didn't have before. Tammy, the main female character in On Ice, so many people have said it, the ending for her, nobody saw coming. I didn't even see it coming. It made sense, as the story unfolded and her storyline was coming to an end. I try and do something. I hate predictability.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want people to be able to tell what's going to happen in my book halfway through. Sometimes you might see a scene coming or something, but the end, I always want some kind of twist that you didn't see coming. Deadly Roses, awesome twist. Twister Town, it's a story, not really much of a twist, but what's the other one? On the Run, great ending, didn't see it coming. On Ice, the main character, John Kincaid, his story, you kind of saw it coming, you kind of didn't. The female character, Tammy, it was completely uncharacteristic, but plausible. As the story unfolds, it could very well have happened. I like to do that, but she changed.
Did you argue? Do you find yourself ever arguing internally with your own characters?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the time. And it's funny, I'll yell at them, and I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you? And then sometimes I'll do that, and it'll make me go change the scene. And exactly, because if I'm saying why would you do that, then a reader might say the same thing.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, okay, no, there's got to be something else. But yeah, I talk to them, I yell at them, I scream at them.
And once you're done with the book, do the characters live on in your head, or do they go away?
Sometimes they do. My memory isn't very good, so a lot.
I'm with you there.
Sometimes someone will mention a character, and I'll be like, "Who?"
Yeah.
And then I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right." So they can. There's the characters in On Ice. I'm sorry, in On the Run. This is the first public announcement of this. There's going to be a sequel for On the Run.
Cool.
So those characters are always in my head. Number one, because we had a lot going on with that book. All that's kind of on the back burner right now, but it's kind of those characters are all still very active in my head, because now I've decided there is going to be a sequel, and I'm trying to play out. I'll do that when I finish 30 minutes and get that released next year sometime. The sequel for On the Run, those characters are constantly in my head, because I have to play it out, because I don't want, like Major League. I'll give you a perfect example. Major League is my favorite movie of all time. Funny, great sports.
Yeah.
Major League 2, terrible. Major League 3, even worse. So I don't want On the Run, the second one, to fall into that category. So
do sometimes you dislike a character? In other words, it's a prominent character, but you really, really just fundamentally dislike it.
Oh
Dislike
yeah,
that
Snake
character.
and Deadly Rose is the main character, Snake. I can't stand that dude. Yeah, and it
Really?
was yeah, and he's a bad guy. He abuses his girlfriend. Um, he's very abusive. That book. I didn't set out for that book to draw attention to domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
The story just kind of turned out that way. Um, it and the more the story went on, the more I hated this guy, and the better his character became because of it.
In other words, strong feelings beget better writing.
Yeah, yeah, and it was uh, he kind of got what he deserved,
Yeah,
and he got and that happened because I hated him so much. You know?
that's awesome. That is
But it
awesome.
also it made his character much stronger though too, because as the book went on and as I disliked him more, I could put myself in his position and think, what would he do? Would he be a complete, I don't know what we're doing for language here, but it would be a really bad guy,
Yeah, yeah,
and it was easier to make him commit not so positive acts, and yeah, and a lot of people have said it, the same thing. They hate the guy.
yeah. Wow.
So yeah, it was cool, and it's a lot of fun. And then on the other hand, his girlfriend, who he was abusing, I felt bad for. So I made her storyline, and the guy who came in, to try and save her. They kind of gelled too. So yeah, I stick myself right in the middle. You
It,
know,
in other words, you stick yourself in the middle emotionally, or stick yourself in the middle so you're actually seeing the environment that you're writing from. It's almost as if you were in the middle of describing one of the sporting events you were writing about.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, in my mind, I'm there. When John Kincaid was in court having his sentence read, I was there. When Snake and I can't remember her name now, the female character, when he was giving her a beat down in an alley in New York City alleyway, I was there, and I felt bad for her. I felt angry for him. All of my scenes, I put myself mentally right there.
So are you as a third party observer, or is it almost as if you're inhabiting the body of each of the characters as they're going through their own particular place?
It's kind of like I'm them, yeah. In a way, yeah. It could also be sometimes I look at it from like a third party, whereas what I would want to see happen.
Mm.
But yeah, a lot of the time, yeah, I feel like it's me in there, and I try and what I do with a lot of my stuff, Twister Town with the tornadoes and On Ice with the court scenes and the jail scenes and all that. I do a lot of research so I can try and relay the mindset of the people and what they would be thinking in there. Like on Ice, I watched a lot of courtroom scenes, a lot of jailhouse scenes, different stuff like that. Tornadoes. I actually learned. I bought some books and taught myself how tornadoes work, so that the meteorologist talking on TV made sense. And I've had some of my reviews for that have said, yeah, it's a great book. It keeps you entertained and you learn stuff.
Interesting.
That's cool. But yeah, I put myself in right there. And what would I do? What would I not do? Because again, you try not to be predictable.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it. Essentially, that predictability theme has come up several times. Being so, someone who is just beginning their writing process, where is the best place for them to start?
Um, if somebody knows that they want to write a book, what I would say is sit down, write the story out in paragraphs, short paragraphs. Don't write the book. Do Get your characters, write them out, write down where you want them to go, where their storyline is going to go. Always try and have a secondary storyline to keep the reader entertained.
Give me an example. Like, what would be a secondary storyline?
Um, on the Run is a perfect example. Dwight Cobb is an author who got caught up in a bad drug deal,
Mm-hmm.
and the Cuban cartel, the Cuban drug cartel, is chasing him and they want to kill him. Secondary storyline is Dwight Cobb's wife disappeared. He has no idea where she is. She's doing her own thing. I don't want to give it away, but they both trek across the country. Different paths, different experiences, but that's what I mean. And then they came together at the end.
Interesting.
It keeps the reader engaged more, as long as you don't have too many going on. On the Run was very easy to follow along with.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say write it down. Make sure what they want to do is going to be able to play out. And if they get a solid, I don't do an outline, but I'm saying to do an outline.
So why? I'm curious. You don't
because if it's the first time that they've written a book,
yeah,
and you can never be sure you really want to do something until you start to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to jump off of that cliff. It looks so cool until they get up on that cliff and they're like, oh no, it looks different up here. So take the time, a few weeks, do some paragraphs, write about half of your story out, and then you can start to edit it, put it together, and then you can start to write it in book form. You should have a pretty good idea if it's actually something you want to do, because a lot of people, it's like anything in life, they want to do a lot of things, and then when it comes time to do it, they're like, oh no, this, it's easy to become overwhelmed. Like I'm in 7 books now or something. Now when I get it in my head, I want to sit. I just sit and start writing.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do that. But on the first one, I wasn't sure I was ever going to finish on ice.
Yeah. Good advice. Yeah.
Just a little bit at a time. Take your time. That's the key thing. Don't rush. Take that. And it was so funny because the first one was 3 years and the second one was 4 months.
That's cool.
But at that time, because On Ice was so well received, I didn't think anybody was going to read it. Not only did they read it, they loved it. And I was like, wow, I can actually do this.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Scott Stevens, this has been a fantastic conversation. International best-selling and award-winning author. I'm sure we'll have more conversations. It's been good talking to you.
Thank you. You too, Greg.
Help me find a way to the other side. Is it me or is it anxiety? Talk to me, or I just might be going out tonight.